In a world full of loud Hollywood stars, there was one man who didn't need noise, because his silence spoke louder than anyone else's fame. This is the story of Robert Duvall, the man who defined American manhood without ever raising his voice. Robert Seldon Duvall was born on January 5, 1931, in the small town of San Diego, California. His father was a U.S. Navy admiral, a man who lived by order, structure, and the belief that one should never speak loudly when a quiet word will do. His mother was a Southern gentlewoman, elegant but grounded, with roots deep in Virginia soil, and between these two worlds, military precision and Southern softness, grew a young boy who learned to observe, to listen, and to understand human nature long before he understood acting. The young Robert wasn't loud. He wasn't attention-seeking. He wasn't the boy cracking jokes in the corner of the classroom, nor the one standing proudly on a stage. Instead, he watched, he studied, he absorbed. He carried himself with the understated presence of someone who didn't need validation, someone who simply existed in his own truth. And perhaps that was the first ingredient in the making of an American icon. Yet even in that quiet life, fate was stirring. Robert attended Principia College, a small liberal arts school nestled in the Midwest. It was there, somewhat unexpectedly, that he discovered what would change the course of his life forever. Acting. Not the glamorous Hollywood fantasy, but the raw craft of storytelling. One professor saw something rare in him: and honesty. Robert wasn't performing. He was being. He wasn't pretending. He was revealing. His presence wasn't theatrical. It was human. The professor encouraged him to pursue acting seriously, and what followed was one of the most iconic training grounds in American theatrical history. After college, Duvall made his way to New York City, stepping into the hallowed walls of the neighborhood playhouse school of the theater. This wasn't the type of place where future movie stars strutted around with oversized confidence. This was the home of the legendary Sanford Meisner, the man whose techniques would shape countless powerhouse actors. And in that dimly lit room of raw, unpolished talent, Robert Duvall found himself learning not just how to act, but how to feel. Meisner's gospel was simple: acting is living truthfully under imaginary circumstances. And there, in that humble classroom, Duvall learned how to carve truth out of silence, how to awaken emotion without force, how to embody characters not by pretending to be them, but by understanding them. Even then, fellow students noticed there was something magnetic about him. Not a flashy magnetism, not the kind that grabs the eye and holds it hostage, but something deeper, something people lean toward without realizing why. And it was during this period that Robert Duvall formed friendships that would echo throughout Hollywood history. Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman, three young actors not yet famous, scraping by in the city, sharing meals, sharing frustrations, sharing dreams. They were broke. They were hungry. They were told no far more than they were told yes, but they had each other, and they had the craft. Hoffman later recalled how the three of them lived in dirty apartments and cheap clothes, yet spoke with the passion of men who believed in their destiny. Hackman remembered Duvall as the quietest among them, the one who didn't speak unless he had something meaningful to say. But when he did speak, people listened. Robert Duvall's early years were not glamorous. He worked odd jobs. He waited tables. He lived paycheck to paycheck. But even then, he carried within him the quiet confidence of a man who understood something profound. Greatness doesn't need to arrive loudly. It can grow in silence. It can take its time. It can wait until the moment is right. And that moment came in 1962 when, almost out of nowhere, Hollywood discovered him. It is almost poetic that Robert Duvall's film debut was the role of Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird. Boo Radley, the silent loner, the misunderstood outcast, the man whose gentleness was hidden behind layers of myth and suspicion. Duvall had no dialogue, not a single line. He appeared only briefly, and yet somehow his presence haunted the film, anchoring it emotionally in a way few supporting characters ever have. It takes a very rare type of actor to make silence unforgettable. But Duvall did. His stillness spoke. His eyes spoke. His mere existence on screen spoke, and audiences felt something, even if they couldn't articulate it. This was a young man who understood the power of subtlety, a tool he would wield throughout his entire career. After To Kill a Mockingbird, Hollywood began to sense something special in him. He was not the typical leading man. He wasn't tall and glamorous like Gregory Peck, nor magnetic like Paul Newman. But Duvall had something different, raw humanity. He looked like a real man, like a real man, spoke like a real man. He didn't chase charm, he embodied truth. And in a decade when America was changing, when the fad of perfect masculinity was beginning to crack, Robert Duvall offered something revolutionary, a new image of American manhood, one built not on bravado, but on honesty. Throughout the 1960s, he worked constantly on stage, on television, in films. He appeared in The Twilight Zone, Naked City, The Outer Limits, and countless others. Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with him yet, but they knew they needed him. Directors loved him because he delivered. Writers loved him because he elevated their words. Actors loved him because he made scenes feel real. And audiences gradually began to recognize him as the quiet force, shaping the emotional soul of every project he touched. But everything changed in 1972. The film that would alter American cinema forever, the film that would redefine storytelling, acting, myth, and family was being assembled. And in that masterpiece, one character would become the stone heart of the Corleone family. Tom Hagen, the Godfather. Robert Duvall didn't play the loudest character. He didn't play the flashiest. But he played the one character everyone trusted. The one character who spoke softly, but whose words carried weight. The one who held the entire machine together. Tom Hagen became the quiet embodiment of loyalty, reason, and emotional intelligence, qualities rare in a crime world fueled by ego and violence. And Duvall portrayed him with a tender restraint that would become one of his trademarks. The world saw it too. Audiences who might not have known his name before suddenly felt a connection to him. Tom Hagen was not a caricature. He was not a stereotype. He was a man torn between loyalty and morality, between belonging and being an outsider. And it was Robert Duvall's quiet strength, his calm eyes, his measured breath, his steady voice that made the role unforgettable. In that moment, Hollywood finally understood. Robert Duvall didn't need loudness to dominate the screen. His silence was enough. After The Godfather, Duvall's star rose rapidly, but he still refused to play by Hollywood's rules. He didn't chase fame. He didn't appear at every party. He didn't try to reinvent himself as a glamorous figure. Instead, he continued, choosing roles that spoke to the human heart: flawed men, gentle men, broken men, honorable men, ordinary men. He was becoming, slowly and steadily, the definition of an American man on screen, not the exaggerated hero, not the perfect idol, but the real one, the kind who feels deeply, who listens carefully, who speaks thoughtfully, the kind who stands in the quiet. By the mid-1970s, Robert Duvall had already become one of the most respected actors in American cinema. And yet, somehow, he wasn't done. Not even close. Another role would soon come to him, one that would challenge him, stretch him, expose his emotional core in a way audiences had never seen before. And that role would push him into the next chapter of his legendary career, one marked by vulnerability, passion, and a raw intensity that would solidify him as one of the greatest actors of all time. But before we arrive at that chapter, we have to step back into Duvall's personal journey, because behind the quiet legend, behind the calm voice, behind the humble demeanor, lived a man who carried the complexities of life with remarkable grace. Fame never changed him. Hollywood never swallowed him. He remained the same grounded soul who once shared an apartment with Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman, still humble, still thoughtful, still driven by storytelling rather than celebrity. Robert Duvall's approach to acting has always been deeply rooted in empathy. He once said that to play a character truthfully, you have to love him even if the world does not. And that philosophy seeped into every role he touched. Whether he played a troubled father, a hardened cowboy, a conflicted soldier, or a lonely preacher, he always found the humanity within. He always found the quiet center that made the character real. It's this authenticity that has drawn generations of audience members to him, not just as an actor, but as a symbol. Robert Duvall redefined American manhood at a time when society was questioning old ideals. He proved that strength does not always come from dominance. Sometimes, strength comes from understanding. Sometimes, it comes from restraint. Sometimes, it comes from silence. This is the world Robert Duvall walked into as he entered the 1970s decade that would test him, deepen him, and transform him into one of the most emotionally profound actors of his generation. If the 1960s were the years where he quietly built the foundation of his craft, the 1970s were the years he carved his name into the soul of Hollywood. After The Godfather exploded across the world, Robert Duvall suddenly found himself caught in a strange and uncomfortable spotlight. His face became familiar to millions. People stopped him on the street. Directors who once overlooked him now begged for meetings. Yet, true to his nature, he didn't bask in fame. He didn't try to become a celebrity. He didn't reinvent himself as a leading man in flashy suits or high-profile romances. Instead, he stayed rooted, steady, quiet, even a little shy. When interviewers asked him how success felt, he simply shrugged and said he was grateful, but wanted to keep working. That was it. No dramatic speeches, no self-celebration. Robert Duvall moved through the frenzy of fame like a man walking calmly through a storm. But the truth is, the storm brought opportunities, roles that required not a performer, but an observer, a thinker, a man capable of deep emotional understanding. Hollywood was changing. Audiences no longer wanted perfect heroes and one-dimensional characters. They wanted flawed men, complicated men, real men, and no one embodied realness on screen like Robert Duvall. This set the stage for one of the most transformative roles of his career, one that would push him into emotional territory few actors dared enter. That role was Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore in Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola's haunting masterpiece about the brutality and madness of the Vietnam War. The film was chaotic behind the scenes. There were storms, delays, injuries, budget disasters. The production was a battle. Actors cracked under pressure. Crew members broke down. Coppola himself nearly lost his mind. And yet, amid all the chaos, Robert Duvall walked onto set like a man walking into a Sunday afternoon, calm, professional, focused. While others were overwhelmed by the madness, Duvall thrived in it. He didn't just act the role of the fearless, eccentric commander, he became him with startling ease. Kilgore is one of the most unforgettable characters in cinema history. He is at once insane and magnetic, terrifying and oddly charming. His obsession with surfing in the middle of a war, his infamous line, "Loved the smell of napalm in the morning," and his peculiar mixture of brutality and boyish enthusiasm created a character unlike anything audiences had ever seen. And yet, behind all the chaos, behind all the insanity, Robert Duvall grounded Kilgore with something vital: authenticity. He didn't play him as a cartoon villain or a caricature of American militarism. He played him as a real man, an officer who compartmentalized horror through bravado, a soldier hardened by routine, a leader desensitized by power, yet humanized by personal passions. And that's why Kilgore's scenes remain iconic. Duvall didn't shout to stand out, he simply existed with such honesty that the scenes became unforgettable. In interviews later, Duvall would shrug off the role as if it was nothing special. He'd say, "I just tried to make him a real guy." But that was the magic. He always tried to make characters real, and in doing so, he shaped American cinema in ways he never took credit for. The late 1970s brought Robert Duvall deeper into the emotional soul of his craft. He continued taking roles that resonated with human complexity, men who were neither heroes nor villains, but something in between. He played fathers, criminals, lawmen, broken men, proud men, ordinary men trying to navigate extraordinary circumstances. And in each performance, audiences felt something intimate, something painfully human. Unlike other actors who built their careers on dramatic outbursts or theatrical gestures. Duvall built his on subtlety. He didn't act out emotions, he allowed them to breathe quietly beneath the surface. It was this emotional intelligence that eventually led him to the role that many consider the heart of his career, Max Sledge in Tender Mercies. But that milestone was still a few years away. Before Duvall reached the peak of emotional vulnerability on screen, he had to walk through another chapter, one that tested him not as a performer, but as a man. In the late 70s, Robert's personal life began to shift. Hollywood success had given him financial security, but he still lived simply. His relationships were complicated, his schedule demanding, and the intensity of his craft made him difficult to live with at times. Acting, for Robert Duvall, was not just a job. It was life. It consumed him. He approached every role with total immersion, sometimes disappearing into characters so deeply that the line between performance and reality blurred. And while this dedication made him one of the greatest actors of his time, it also created emotional distance in his personal relationships. But there was one thing that kept him grounded, a passion unexpected, joyful, and completely separate from Hollywood: dancing. Robert Duvall loved music, loved rhythm, loved movement. And not just casually, he had a lifelong devotion to tango, flamenco, and traditional folk dances. Even in his toughest years, even when career and personal life felt heavy, dancing allowed him to breathe. It reminded him that life could still be playful, expressive, sensual. In an industry that often demanded emotional intensity, dance offered him freedom. This contrast, the disciplined actor and the passionate dancer, became one of the most beautiful contradictions of Robert Duvall's life. He could deliver the quietest, most controlled performance on screen, then go home and lose himself in the fire of a tango. It was a reminder that even legends need something that makes them feel alive beyond the craft. The decade turned, and the 1980s arrived with new challenges, new work, and new opportunities that would carve Duvall's legacy deeper into Hollywood's foundation. By now, he had earned the respect not only of audiences, but of critics, directors, and fellow actors who saw him as a master of authenticity. But still, he remained the same quiet, grounded soul. Fame did not inflate him. Awards did not distract him. Success did not change him. Then, in 1983, everything crystallized. A script landed in his hands. A simple story, a quiet story, a story about a broken country singer trying to rebuild his life, his career, and his heart. The film was Tender Mercies, and the character was Max Sledge, a man burdened with regret, with loss, with failure, yet searching for hope in the soft, unassuming corners of life. To many actors, the role might have seemed too quiet, too still, too slow, but to Robert Duvall, it was a treasure, a portrait of human vulnerability he understood intimately. Max Sledge is not a man of grand speeches. He is not a dramatic, explosive personality. He is a man who talks softly, who carries heavy emotional scars, who wants nothing more than peace. And perhaps that's why the role fit Duvall so perfectly. He didn't need to act Max Sledge. He simply had to inhabit him. The filming process was intimate, gentle, and emotionally draining. Duvall didn't push the performance. He let it unfold naturally. Every breath, every silence, every quiet confession carried decades of pain and longing. When he sang in the film, yes, those were his real vocals. There was a rawness in his voice that felt like a prayer, a confession, plea for redemption. Audiences could feel the emotion trembling beneath every note. When Tender Mercies was released, it didn't explode like a blockbuster. It didn't dominate headlines or break box office records. But it touched people deeply, quietly, profoundly. And, for the first time in his life, Robert Duvall received the recognition he had quietly earned for decades. The Academy Award for Best Actor. When he walked onto the Oscar stage, there were no dramatic tears, no emotional breakdowns, no glamorous displays. He simply thanked the people who helped him, thanked the writer, thanked the director, thanked his family, and then he stepped off stage as gracefully as he stepped on. It was perhaps the most Robert Duvall moment imaginable, a man receiving one of the highest honors in the world while remaining entirely himself. The Oscar changed nothing about him. He didn't seek bigger roles or higher paychecks. He didn't chase the title of Hollywood royalty. Instead, he continued to choose roles the same way he always had, based on truth, based on character, based on emotional depth. Through the mid-1980s, he starred in The Natural, Colors, and Falling Down, each role defined by nuance, restraint, and an emotional honesty only he could deliver. He brought quiet authority to every frame he appeared in, proving again and again that masculinity does not need to be loud to be powerful. But the next chapter of his career, the one waiting just beyond this emotional peak, would introduce him to an entirely different kind of role, a role that would echo across generations, a role that would transform him from an already respected actor into something greater, something mythic. It was a role that required wisdom, strength, humor, tenderness, leadership, and a deep understanding of the American spirit. And Robert Duvall approached it the same way he approached everything, with silence first, then truth. Robert Duvall had conquered Hollywood, not through noise, but through sincerity. And yet, somehow, the most defining role of his life was still ahead of him. The screen fades back, and from darkness, this time with the soft crackle of a campfire, flames dance quietly in the night, warm and steady, illuminating the face of a man who has lived through storms and silence, triumph and heartbreak. The voiceover returns, gentle and reflective. Some legends are defined not by what they conquer, but by what they carry: their past, their lessons, their wounds, their wisdom. And that is where we find Robert Duvall now, not the young actor struggling in New York, not the rising star of the 70s, not even the Oscar winner of the early 80s, but a man stepping into the role that would cement his place in American culture in a way nothing else ever had. As the 1980s closed, Duvall was already considered a master among actors. His name carried respect. His performances were studied. His approach to authenticity had influenced an entire generation of artists. But in 1989, he received a script, one that would transport him into a world of dust, horses, wind, and brotherhood. A world where the American frontier still echoed with old values. A world where men lived by honor, loyalty, and quiet courage. The script was for Lonesome Dove, and the character was Augustus Gus McCrae. At first, Duvall hesitated. Many actors did. It was long, sprawling, emotionally complex. It demanded vulnerability, humor, toughness, tenderness, and the kind of lived-in wisdom only a handful of actors could authentically bring. But when he read Gus, truly read him, something stirred inside of him. Gus wasn't just a character. He was an entire era of American manhood wrapped into a single soul. Mischievous, yet wise. Fearless, yet sentimental. Charming, yet profound. Reckless, yet deeply moral. When Duvall finally accepted the role, he made one condition: he would play Gus, not Call. Tommy Lee Jones could have Call. Duvall felt the soul of Gus in his bones. And once filming began, it was clear to everyone on set that the character had found the perfect vessel. Robert Duvall didn't play Gus McCrae. He became Gus McCrae. He moved like him. He breathed like him. He laughed like him. He carried the weight of his past loves and losses with a lightness that only deep emotional truth can hold. In every scene, from the humorous banter to the heartbreaking confrontations, to the quiet moments by the fire, Duvall delivered a performance so natural, so intimate, so profoundly human that audiences would forever associate him with the American West. What made Gus McCrae unforgettable was not bravado or violence or the mythic image of a cowboy. It was his tenderness, his capacity to love, the way he treated life with a mix of joy and melancholy, humor and sorrow. And Robert Duvall captured every shade of that emotional spectrum with masterful subtlety. When Lonesome Dove aired, it didn't just entertain, it touched the nation. Viewers cried with Gus, laughed with him, walked with him, grieved with him. Duvall became the heartbeat of the story, and many critics called it one of the greatest performances ever recorded for television. For countless fans, Gus McCrae became the signature example of who Robert Duvall was as an actor: gentle, wise, complex, and deeply human. But the truth is, Lonesome Dove didn't just impact audiences. It transformed Duvall himself. He called it one of the greatest roles of his life, saying he felt closer to Gus than to any other character he had ever portrayed. And that connection would echo throughout his later roles, men who carried quiet dignity, who lived by internal code, who spoke softly, but whose words cut deep. As the 1990s unfolded, Robert Duvall entered a golden era of creative freedom. He was no longer climbing, he was no longer proving, he was simply working from a place of passion. He took roles that challenged him emotionally, spiritually, and artistically, and one of those roles would lead him into another one of his most beloved performances. In 1997, Duvall wrote, directed, and starred in The Apostle, a film that would become a masterpiece of American storytelling. He poured years of his life into the script, crafting the story of a flawed but deeply spiritual Southern preacher named Sonny Dewey. It was a character filled with contradictions, charismatic, yet broken, powerful yet vulnerable, sinful, yet yearning for redemption. Duvall was fascinated by human complexity, and Sonny represented that complexity in its purest form. Studios were hesitant. Religious films weren't considered profitable. The story was too raw, too honest, too unvarnished. But Duvall believed in it with the kind of quiet conviction that had defined his entire career, so he financed the film himself. He poured millions of his own savings into the project, not to create a blockbuster, not to chase awards, but to tell the truth of the character. The result was cinematic magic. Every frame of The Apostle felt alive with Duvall's devotion to authenticity. He didn't portray Sonny as a stereotype of a preacher. He portrayed him as a man fighting to hold on to hope, while drowning in guilt and regret. When Sonny spoke, his sermons weren't written, they were lived. The emotions trembling in his voice were real. The passion in his gestures, the desperation in his prayers, the longing in his eyes, all real. Once again, Robert Duvall redefined what acting could be. The film earned him another Oscar nomination. Critics called it one of the greatest American films of the decade. But even more importantly, audiences saw something profound. The heart of a man who believed that storytelling could heal, that faith could be complex, that redemption could be painful. The Apostle remains a testament to Duvall's emotional courage, his willingness to dive into the flawed, fragile corners of the human soul. Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, he continued working with the same steady rhythm he always had. He starred in films like A Civil Action, Pen Range, The Judge, and Get Low. Each role carried the same trademark qualities that had followed him throughout his life: authenticity, humility, emotional depth, and quiet power. Directors adored him, younger actors idolized him, but Duvall himself stayed true to his nature: soft-spoken, grounded, uninterested in fame. He famously said that he would rather have a good meal with friends than attend an award show. He didn't care about being a Hollywood figure. He cared about being a storyteller, and that is the essence of his legacy. Robert Duvall shaped American manhood on screen, not through loudness, but through truth. He showed that a man could be strong and tender, brave and afraid, lost and hopeful. He showed that masculinity wasn't about dominance, it was about depth, about reflection, about emotional honesty. And as the years passed, audiences began to realize something. The reason Robert Duvall's characters felt so real was because he was real. No pretense, no image, no ego. He once said, "I'm a character actor, and I've always been one." But the truth is, he became much more. He became the standard by which character acting is measured. As he entered his later years, Duvall didn't slow down because of age. He simply chose roles more thoughtfully. He worked on projects he genuinely cared about. He spent more time dancing, more time with loved ones, more time enjoying the simple things: horses, good food, music, and the quiet comfort of everyday life. In interviews, he spoke with a gentle humor about aging, saying things like, "It beats the alternative." He never saw himself as old, just seasoned, experienced, grateful. And even in his 80 seconds, he still gave performances that actors half his age could only dream of delivering. You see, The truth about Robert Duvall is that he never chased greatness. He simply followed honesty, and that honesty carried him to greatness all on its own. The screen fades to a final montage, slow, poetic, almost like a lullaby of memories. Boo Radley's silent gaze, Tom Hagen's calm eyes, Kilgore, standing proudly in the chaos of war, Max Sledge, singing softly in a dim motel room, Gus McCrae, smiling with mischief and wisdom, Sonny Dewey preaching with trembling emotion, character after character each etched deeply into American culture. Robert Duvall never aimed to be the loudest voice in the room. He aimed to be the truest, and in doing so, he left behind a blueprint not of stardom, but of humanity. The music fades to a gentle hush. The sky on screen fades from gold to deep blue, and the final words settle like a warm breeze across a quiet field. He is the quiet legend, the man who defined American manhood not with noise, but with soul. A man who taught us that strength lies in stillness, and truth lives in silence.